Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. It is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. And don't forget to share this episode with your family and friends. Now, I got a great guest coming on. She is someone that exposed so many scandals with the last administration, especially when it comes to the Biden family and the corruption within it. She's the author of The Big Guy, which is a phenomenal book, and also The Laptop from Hell, that she had to go through more videos and images that have probably scarred her beyond belief. But in any event, I want to welcome Miranda Devine to the PAS Report. Miranda, pleasure having you on as always.
Thanks very much for having me, Nicholas.
Well, I'm glad you could be here because obviously the Biden administration may have ended, and there's a lot of people that may want us to move on from the Biden administration, but we really can't, because do we really know who is actually in charge of this country for the 4-year period?
Well, Joe Biden, the other day, it must have got all too much for him, having people talk about the auto pen and asking who was running the country, because he came out and gave a quick interview saying it's ridiculous to say that he wasn't in charge, that he made every single decision, every executive order, every pardon was signed by him, and it's all ridgy-dig, and it's an insult to say any such thing. Look, I don't think this is a black and white issue. I think it's complicated because the cognitive decline that he's suffering from, whatever form it's taken, if anybody, I'm sure practically everybody in the audience has had some person close to them or someone they know who's suffered from this in old age. And we've also had reporting from people close to Joe Biden that it's not consistent. You know, he has good days, he has bad days, good hours within the bad days, and so on. You could tell that when he flew overseas, jet lag really affected him badly, much more than it would have a younger person or a person without his problems, because he was completely gaga when he was running around, G8 or G20 or whatever. So there definitely were moments that he was non-compos mentis. And I'm sure that the way he was controlled by such a small clique in the White House, led by Jill Biden, the First Lady, dubbed Lady Macbeth, and she had a very loyal factotum called Anthony Bernal, who had been with her since 2008, since the Obama election campaign, and sort of helped her to become Second Lady, settle into that role, and then again helped her with First Lady, organised her wardrobe, orchestrated her
Did a terrible job with that.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because she did. There were sort of memes about how she looked like she was dressed in couch fabric, because she did these big florals. I think Oscar de la Renta. I don't think it was cheap, but really loud, not very flattering outfits. And then the last couple of years that changed. So whether or not Anthony Bernal got in a stylist or he himself changed his taste, but she then started dressing more suitably in sort of monochromes, and she looked pastels and she looked slightly better. But anyway, he also, like her 4 Vogue covers, all her overseas travel. I think he really encouraged her to think of herself as stepping into Joe Biden's role as Joe Biden started fading away, losing energy, losing interest, whatever, in the last year. And so she was doing all this solo campaigning, commandeering Air Force One for that purpose, traveling overseas to like the Jordanian royal wedding, Paris to have lunch with Mrs. Macron, Brigitte Macron, who she, I think, fancied herself as a bit of an intimate with. So she loved all this overseas luxury vacationing on her personal jet, Air Force One, sans Joe Biden, but with Anthony Bernal, who just smoothed everything for her and flattered her and had inveigled his way into the first family's sort of circle of trust, including with Hunter Biden. So they were not going to let Joe Biden be seen in public when he was having a bad day or some bad moments. So what we saw was just the tip of the iceberg, but I still think there were moments, not moments, but, whole hours, whole days when Joe Biden was perfectly aware of his surroundings and was making decisions, bad decisions, but his judgment has always been flawed. So I'm worried that people are going to give Joe Biden a get out of jail free card, which would be the ultimate concession to a lifelong con man and liar. He knew what he was doing when he instructed his generals to abandon Bagram Air Force Base. It was an ego thing. He demanded they do what he said against their better judgment. They did, and it was a disaster, and 13 US service members died as a result. Those are his judgments, and they've always been terrible. People have remarked in his career, if there's a way to F it up, Joe Biden will find that way. And so his judgment kind of didn't get any better as he got older, but he was still fully aware, and I think fully culpable for all the crimes and sins of his presidency and vice presidency, all the corruption, and also the hiding of classified documents. And I think that if you look at Robert Hur, the special counsel's report into that classified documents case, he's written it extremely carefully, and he doesn't actually say Joe Biden is an elderly man with a failing memory. What he says is he gives the perception of being an elderly man with a fading memory. And once you listen, to me it was obvious in the transcript, knowing what Joe Biden is capable of. But when you hear the audio, you can see that his mind goes woolly as soon as the questions become difficult, and he starts filibustering, changing the subject and acting like a doddery old man. So I think it's an act that suits him to get out of legal trouble, as well as being a genuine problem, at times.
He's one of the ultimate swamp rats. He's been in there for, 50 years, Washington, D.C., plays himself off as this ordinary guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Scranton Joe, they said. But what's really aggravating, first of all, when it comes to the cognitive decline, we all knew it. When he was shaking hands with a ghost or had to be escorted with the Easter Bunny, it was really obvious what was going on when he was talking about corn pop. It's not like that was a secret.
No.
But what does aggravate me, though, is all the people that are now coming out now to try and protect Biden, like you said, insulate him as if he's this demented old man that had no idea what was going on. But they engaged in the largest conspiracy and cover-up in the history of the United States. Let's be honest. The Watergate is a joke compared to this. And now you have the same people that were involved. The Jake Tappers telling us that this Biden was strong and he attacked Lara Trump over the fact that she said that he was in cognitive decline. Now they're all trying to make money off of it. The latest one is Corinne Jean-Pierre. What do you think about this as someone that's in the media?
Oh, it's such a joke. What a grifter, just cashing in because she saw Jake Tapper. I think I saw their book today. I think they're up to about 67,000 in 2 weeks, so that'll be a nice little earner for them. But she's now also defected from the Democrats, and she claims that this is going to be a tell-all book, as her much more polished successor, Carolyn Levitt, put it when she was talking to Howie Carr yesterday. She said, well, there's not really much that she can tell all about since she didn't spend a lot of time in the White House. Apparently she used to swan in at about midday to go and give her press conference, and it was evident from the way she behaved up there at the podium that she was not prepared, that she was kind of lazy, just once over lightly. She'd have that big binder. She'd pretend to answer questions. When she did, she'd either say fob them off, or then she'd leaf through the binder for an interminable amount of time, and then she'd just recite some press release. So she was the world's most hopeless press secretary, but that's on the media. They should have complained bitterly about being kept in the dark like that. That was an appalling way of hiding secrets of the White House. And she was so bad that when it came to serious national security issues, they had to bring in John Kirby. And instead of accepting that was the limitation of her ability. Karine Jean-Pierre, who was extraordinarily self-confident, took that as an insult and sort of started this fight with John Kirby. So maybe she will tell us about the behind-the-scenes gossip about their fractured relationship. But this is a woman really with such a huge ego for no good reason other than I think she went to Harvard. And she once said of herself in an interview that I'm a historic figure and I walk through history.
Let's be honest here. She fit the Biden diversity requirements in his cabinet, in his White House, where she checked several boxes, and that's why she got the job. Everyone knows it, whether or not they want to say it out loud. That's the truth. But when we look at it, we now have Republicans that are launching another investigation into the auto pen, and they want to seek answers. But nothing ever comes of these investigations. We saw it all throughout the Biden administration, and the excuse was, well, we don't have the Justice Department. It's Merrick Garland that could be the only one that really brings charges. Now we do have the Justice Department, but do you anticipate that there's ever going to be accountability for what took place in the Biden White House?
Look, it is frustrating about the sort of lack of follow-through with all these investigations. It becomes a sort of a boy who cried wolf situation, and people like you and me who are all for these investigations just become jaded and cynical. In this case, I think Ed Martin, who should have been the US Attorney for Washington, D.C., but his nomination was basically kiboshed by Senate Republicans. Anyway, he's now in the DOJ. His title, I think, is Pardon Attorney, but he has a pretty wide-ranging brief to look into weaponization under, previous regimes. And he's apparently looking at this auto pen controversy. I was a little bit sort of so-so about it, but John Yoo, the great constitutional lawyer, says that if you can, what you need to do, he thinks it's a big enough scandal that you would have a special counsel. He suggested Robert Hur, although I think Robert Hur's pretty sick of the Bidens. You get Robert Hur in and you do a proper investigation. You bring in everybody that worked there under oath, and you find out who signed the auto pen and whether or not Joe Biden knew about these things, and then you can charge people because this is forgery. And he said there are precedents of doing this. So, look, I don't know if there's the will to do that in the Department of Justice. They have, many things on their plate, and maybe they don't think that this is high on the list of priorities. I'm sort of becoming increasingly convinced that it should be. I think the problem comes with how do you discern with Joe Biden waxing and waning with his mental acuity? How do you determine for sure, beyond a reasonable doubt, that an aide who used the auto pen knew that Joe Biden was unaware of the purpose? So I think that's tricky, but look, I think it's worth a shot because it's so important, and it will bring out some more of the dirty laundry of what happened during Biden's term. There was so much damage wrought. The border alone is such a disaster. It's such a ticking time bomb for us, with all these suspected and potential terrorists flooding in and nobody vetted. And so I think that we can't just push that under the rug and let Joe Biden ride off into the sunset and all the people around him prosper the way they did, and no one ever be held accountable, because that means it will happen again. The Democrats got away with this great con job on the American people.
As they were screaming threats to democracy, and they totally undermined the entire idea of democratic principles within the country. But even this, Democrats and the media constantly scream about constitutional crises under President Trump.
Yeah.
Yet the real constitutional crisis, because we've never seen a situation like this, is what happens if legislation was signed, executive orders were signed, and pardons were signed, but it wasn't with the president's authority. The president didn't make that decision. That's the real constitutional crisis, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, here are these people, the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. The Democrats rabbiting on about democracy for 4 years and MAGA semi-fascists, etc. And really, I mean, it's their guilty consciences speaking, because they were the ones snuffing out democracy, all of them, the media, the Democrats, the Biden administration, all those aides, all those cabinet members who turned a blind eye, who, no cabinet meetings. They must have known. They did know that there was something.
Chuck Todd said in 2022, a cabinet secretary came to him and said, "There's no way Biden can run for re-election. He's shot. He's not going to be able to do it." And Chuck Todd didn't tell that story until after the 2024 debate.
Yeah, I know. The lies they told, sharp as a tack. Karine Jean-Pierre saying, "Oh, he's so energetic, I can't even keep up with him," which might have been true. Might be true because she, as I said, rolled into the office at midday, just like Joe Biden. But honestly, when you think of the damage wrought, and it's not just the actions taken, it was also, all the opportunity cost for, say, the FBI, which was focusing on traditional Catholics and parents at school board meetings, instead of focusing on the terrorist threat at the border. You can't make up for that. That's just damage that is going to be revealing itself in the decades to come.
I think that's critical what you just said, because I want to look at the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. It's June. We're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of this document being put out there by the Biden administration. Tulsi Gabbard has released the strategic operational plans of how the national strategy was actually used to target parents, to target Catholics. Just a few days ago, we're learning from Senator Chuck Grassley that the whole Catholic thing was much more widespread, that it wasn't just the Richmond office creating this intelligence product, that the intelligence product was disseminated throughout FBI offices throughout the country, and it actually went operational as well. One of the things that I am disappointed in is that on day one, when President Trump came in, he hasn't rescinded the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. I agree. Who would do that? Would it just be an executive order, or who's in charge of that? Would it be Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, the best way to do it is through the executive order, through the President of the United States. The DOJ could rescind it as well, but it's obviously, if it comes from President Trump, it's much more forceful. And then I would like to see congressional Republicans actually pass a law against creating any type of document like this again.
I agree. And because I guess that was sort of the predicate for starting to come after Trump supporters or conservatives, that they decided to label domestic terrorists. And, again, the opportunity cost of wasting your time on, some of the most law-abiding people in this country would be traditional Catholics. And this was really the thought police. This was all of a piece with the censorship that we saw on social media around bad ideas or dissent from what the Biden administration, or even before that, the health authorities, the COVID police.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was horrific. And we saw that a lot of those COVID examples were used in the national strategy. Anti-government, anti-authority sentiment. Yeah. So if you went against the mask mandates or the vaccine mandates, well, now you could be a domestic violent extremist. And so the entire timeline was there. When we look at the Trump administration, a lot of people expect reforms, right? And we don't expect the reforms to happen overnight. But there are some simple steps that can be taken. As far as Director of FBI Kash Patel, Deputy Director Dan Bongino, Department of Justice Attorney General Pam Bondi, when it comes to whistleblowers, what are your thoughts on the whistleblowers like Garrett O'Boyle, who has been suspended and had his security clearance revoked for over 900 days, where he could be easily reinstated? Do you think that they need to move fast on some of these things?
Yes, and Steve Friend as well, who I know better than any of the others. Look, these are good men. They went out on a limb. They trashed their careers. They were retaliated against in the most brutal way. I mean, it's hard to even believe what happened to Garrett O'Boyle. This was really malicious. He was told to move across the country with his wife, newborn baby, and a couple of other kids. They arrived, I think they arrived in DC. I can't remember which way it was. Anyway, they arrived at their destination where he'd been sent. All their belongings were in storage. And then he was told, oh no, you've been suspended without pay. And they were homeless. And the FBI wouldn't even let them get their belongings out of storage for months. So this was cruel and unusual punishment. Steve Friend was treated abysmally as well. I know that they have been trying. They have the Empower Oversight lawyers who used to work for Chuck Grassley, and really good people, and they champion whistleblowers. And they've been going into bat for them, but have really hit a brick wall. It seems like there are people inside the FBI who still have power and have persuaded the FBI director that Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle are just too hot to handle. So I mean, at the moment they're still in limbo, but they believe that they're not going to be reinstated or even get any back pay for all the time. It wasn't just, I mean, being suspended without pay is bad enough indefinitely. But also, Steve Friend went to get other jobs, in the security industry, and he couldn't because the FBI wouldn't give him a clean background check. So, they couldn't have guns. It was really stripping of their civil liberties. And
well, let's be honest. They were using them as an example to all the other FBI agents. You dare cross FBI leadership, there's going to be consequences. You go against this agency, there's going to be consequences. And they were made examples of. I think it's disgraceful what happened to them.
It is disgraceful. And, Kash Patel went to bat for them when he was a civilian. He, donated money to them from his NGO, and he was pilloried for it, and they were pilloried for it when they testified in Congress. And yet now he's turned his back on them. And so I can't see any justification for that. I'm still, I guess, give him benefit of the doubt. I'm hoping that the administration finds some place for them, because I think their skills will be valuable and their experience of that retaliation would be valuable in ensuring that it doesn't happen again. At the moment, all I can see is that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, I'm told, are just swamped. As bad as they thought the FBI was, it's 100 times worse, and that really there's very few people in those upper echelons who haven't been tainted in some way. So it's a matter of just trying to triage and find people that they think they can trust for now, who can guide them to find where Christopher Wray has hidden the evidence of wrongdoing, for instance. So I'm not sure. I mean, look, I think it's still early days, but at the moment I would give them a B- or even a C. We're getting a lot of sort of big, blousy promises and not a lot of transparency. The only thing on the other side of the ledger I would say is that, there are a lot of threats out there, and I know they have their hands full trying to track down these potential terrorists who came across the border. I think they picked up another Tajikistan ISIS-related guy. There were 8 Tajikis who came across, or Tajiks, I don't know what you call them, but who came across the border last June who were allied with ISIS. And what I've been told behind the scenes is that it wasn't just 8. There were actually 400 that had melted into the community who were brought in by the same people smuggling network. So, and they were from
a Turkish individual that was big in that network. And one of the things that I find really concerning is the number of Iranians that have been smuggled into the United States, because I don't think people understand, but if these nuclear negotiations don't work out, a strike on Iran is definitely possible. It's actually likely. And Iran does have a lot of assets here in the United States. And so are those agents going to be activated to conduct attacks domestically here in the United States? And so one of my concerns is when, Tom Homan, who I think is doing a phenomenal job out there, But one of the concerns is when he's announcing all these people, criminal illegal aliens that are being deported, I don't really hear too much about Iranians getting caught and deported. And that's something that is a concern. You know, we have an enormous Iranian population here in the United States that's loyal to the United States because they fled. They grew up under the Shah and they fled the Ayatollah's reign. But over the last several years, we've seen a number come in that there's no doubt there's espionage going on.
Absolutely. And I mean, also you could say the same for China. And just the other day, that we had the arrest of the Chinese nationals, the scientists who had some sort of biological agent, dangerous fungal agent or something that they'd smuggled in. And if the trade talks don't go well, who would put it past China to unleash another disaster on the United States? And this, whatever this biological fungal agent was, it sounded pretty dangerous.
It's amazing. Like, who the hell would want to be president of the United States at this point?
I know.
Everything going on. It's such a mess out there, running these agencies and departments and trying to clean it up. But as far as the reforms go, what are your thoughts on ODNI Director Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, she is someone, you brought up transparency before. She is someone that has actually declassified a number of documents. She has terminated well over 100 individuals and purged them from the intelligence ranks. What do you think of the job that she's doing?
Look, I think she's the quiet achiever. She's just going in there without any fanfare and making very decisive actions. For instance, she moved the Presidential Daily Brief out of the CIA into her office, ODNI, because she says the legislation initially was that it was meant to be there, but, the CIA, I guess, wanted to keep the power within itself, and so it never moved across. And so it's meant to be a sort of impartial pull together of all the intelligence from all the different agencies, and yet it's controlled by the CIA. So it means the CIA has an outsized influence on whatever intelligence briefings that the president is getting. That shouldn't be that way, and especially as we've seen the way the CIA was co-opted, at least under Obama with John Brennan. And when you recall that the dishonest letter written by the 51 former intelligence officials, mostly CIA, saying that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, and they did that at the behest of the Biden campaign to give Joe Biden a talking point in his last debate in 2020 against Donald Trump. 5 of those signatories of the 51 were either directors or former directors of the CIA. John Brennan, Leon Panetta, Michael Hayden, Mike Morrell. Mike Morrell actually wrote that letter, and he was the one that fielded the call.
He was the go-between, right? Between Tony Blinken and...
Exactly. The CIA, it does not, and that letter was given the green light by the then CIA director under Donald Trump, Gina Haspel. So that was a CIA op. So having blotted their copybook in so many ways, I don't know why Tulsi Gabbard would trust them. And also because she herself has been a victim of this weaponization, having been put on the so-called Quiet Skies blacklist, where she was followed through airports by air marshals as some sort of domestic terrorist. Now I'm glad to see that the president's just abolished the Quiet Skies program. It was shown to be actually completely useless. It never was tracking down actual terrorists. It was tracking down MAGA supporters or January 6 people, or people like Tulsi Gabbard who were sort of inconvenient to the Democrat regime. So I think because of her experience with that, she's pretty cynical. And when I say she doesn't trust the CIA, I would say that she doesn't really trust anybody, and so she's just going to trust
I don't blame her.
Yeah.
I really don't blame her. I mean, when we look at it, are you concerned? Because to me, it appears over the last few decades, so it's not a Biden thing, it's not a Democrat thing, it's not a Republican thing, but just naturally over the course of the last 3 decades, it appears that the bureaucracy has now emerged as the 4th branch of government. That's independent from the legislative branch, the executive branch, and in some cases it appears that the bureaucracy itself, this giant blob, actually has more power than the President of the United States.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, it was that deep state or that national security state or the blob or the bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, it's this shadowy apparatus that has amassed an enormous amount of unaccountable power. And they orchestrated the impeachment of Donald Trump. They also, I would say, rigged the election by covering up Joe Biden's corruption, by censoring our stories, by employing every device possible to ensure that Donald Trump did not win re-election, and put every obstacle in his way. I guess you can blame Democrats for that with the lawfare afterwards, but it really has been a concerted effort. And they, this blob, whatever we call it, viewed Donald Trump as an existential threat to their power. They pretend it's to democracy, it's really to their power and their control over the presidency. And it's something I think that's plagued presidents, for many years. I mean, John F. Kennedy talked about it. Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. And unfortunately, I think that the power of the unaccountable has just grown since then. And Donald Trump, I guess, is a threat to their power because he's like a bull in a china shop. But I'm not sure how strategic he can be because he's really flying blind. And you need these people. I mean, they are so sort of immoral that I wouldn't put it past them to just turn a blind eye to terrorist threats and allow something to blow up not necessarily blow up in a bomb sense, but in some sense during Donald Trump's presidency, just to cause him grief and sort of distract him from doing whatever it is they don't want him to do.
Well, and to give themselves more power, right? Because they'll say, we told you that white supremacy was the biggest threat, and so that, we see an attack or something.
100%.
Now, one final question, real briefly. Are you shocked as someone in the media that we don't know anything more today about the two people that attempted to assassinate then candidate Trump, now President Trump, that we don't know anything more today than we did when the assassination attempts happened?
Yes. Not necessarily the second one, because Routh, I think his name is, he's facing court, so maybe, you don't hear as much about him, although, I mean, in the United States, you don't have the same contempt laws that occur in, say, England or Australia. And so there's really no reason why we wouldn't know more about the suspect. But when it comes to the 20-year-old who conducted the first assassination attempt and actually did manage to murder Corey Comparatori, we should know everything about him. And we know nothing about him. His social media is non-existent. His family has gone to ground. The FBI, I mean, I was on Air Force One interviewing Donald Trump a couple of months ago, and he turned around to Mike Waltz and said, because I asked about the assassination attempts, and he turned around to Mike Waltz and he said, I need to know this. Why don't I know? I deserve to know. Get the FBI to tell us. And then the FBI said, they were waiting on someone else, and we still don't know. So I'm interviewing the president next week and I will ask him again, but I wonder if he even knows. I mean, it should be all public. Why is it a secret?
I don't know. It's very concerning. That's why I think the bureaucracy has taken on a life of its own, and it's become even more powerful than the president in some cases. In any event, I really want to thank you for joining me. Everyone needs to check out Laptop from Hell and The Big Guy. We'll have links up at the P.A.S. Report podcast. Miranda, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, you too, Nicholas. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.